Good morning, class. The last thing we had covered was the election of 1844. James K. Polk had run with his vice presidential candidate George M. Dallas against Henry Clay, and James K. Polk had won. The outgoing John Tyler, because Polk had run on an expansionist ticket, believing that the American public, in electing Polk, wanted to expand, went ahead and brought in Texas to the Union. Now, I did not go ahead and cover with you Polk's program, what he proposed in the campaign, and so we're going to back up a little bit and go into that. So let me go ahead and back up. There was his election. John Taylor bringing in Texas through all the pictures of John Taylor, and there we go. We begin today with the so-called Oregon country, this enormous wilderness. It sprawled west of the Rockies that run down the backbone here of the country, all the way to the tip of this would be the Oregon Territory if it existed today, to the tip of the Alaskan Panhandle. Now, we didn't own Alaska at that time period, so it meant nothing to us, but had we have gone from the northern boundary, had we have acquired all of the Oregon Territory, and then later, when we acquired Alaska, we would have had a continual stretch of the United States up through the Oregon Territory, all the way up through Alaska. But that's where the Alaskan Territory cut off, right there. British claims to the Oregon Territory, to all or part of it. Britain and the U.S. had claims to all or part of the Oregon Territory. The British claims were strongest to the northern portion. This is the Columbia River right through here, and their claims were strongest to the part north of the Columbia River. The U.S. claims were strongest south of the Columbia River. Both were based squarely on prior discovery, exploration, and on actual occupation. Americans, for their part, could point to exploration and occupation. Captain Robert Gray in 1772, this was prior to Lewis and Clark, who in 1804 to 1806. This shaky American toehold was ultimately strengthened by the presence of missionaries and other settlers, a sprinkling of whom reached the grassy Willamonte River Valley, and that's right around in this area, south of the Columbia River, in the 1830s. The United States had sought to divide the vast domain by the 49th parallel, here from the Lake of the Woods all the way across up to the Oregon Territory. We had followed the 49th parallel, and we had said to the English, why don't we just continue the 49th parallel out to the coastline and have that continue to be the dividing line? But the British were completely unwilling to do this because they said, no, the Columbia River is our St. Lawrence of the West. Anything that we are trying to get out of the interior. Once we can get it to the waterway, we then float it out, because of course you do not have roads in the interior of this wild territory, and we can then get it to the coast and ship it wherever we want. So they are not about to give up the Columbia River, which flows through south of the 49th parallel. A handful of Americans had, over the years, come creaking across and had settled very heavily in the Willamonte River Valley. The area in dispute was only a very small area, that north of the Columbia River up to the 49th parallel. The whole fateful issue would now be tossed into the presidential election of 1844. Meanwhile, the expansionists, dominated by the pro-Texas Southerners, had nominated James K. Polk. He is the first dark horse presidential candidate. And you're saying, what is a dark horse candidate? A dark horse candidate is someone who has come to the convention with no intention of running for the presidency. The party has no intention of running him either. They have two favorites that are their front runners. The problem is, amongst the Democrats, neither one of these two front runners can edge out the other. And so they all give some speeches, have some rah-rah, and then they take a vote. Neither one gets enough votes to strongly enough edge out the others. So they have some more speeches, some more songs, rah-rah, and they take another vote. No one wins a big enough majority. Some more speeches, some more rah-rah, some more songs. Finally, a day or two later, wee hours of the morning, everyone is exhausted, they're worn out, they're into their 130-some vote, and someone finally says, we are just frazzled. Neither side is coming out ahead. How about Joe Schmo? Everyone know Joe Schmo? Yeah, we all know Joe Schmo. Anyone hate and opposed to Joe Schmo? No, we're not opposed to Joe Schmo. Well, then let's all vote for Joe Schmo and go to bed. Oh, okay, let's vote for Joe Schmo. Now, that is not to say that James K. Polk was an unknown. He was in Congress. He was well known, well respected, but he had not come to the convention intending on being a candidate. The party had not met with the intention of running him as a candidate. And so this is what it means to be a dark horse candidate. And he is the first dark horse candidate in U.S. history. The campaign of 1844 was in part an expression of the mighty emotional upsurge known as manifest destiny. The concept of we are manifestly destined in the United States to spread our democratic ideals from sea to shining sea. Now, we were jointly controlling with England the territory of Oregon, but we did not have firm ownership of it in that we were jointly controlling it with England. So now this big feeling across the nation, all parties, all peoples, that we are manifestly destined by God to spread our democratic ideals from sea to shining sea is spreading hard and impacting everyone. And so countless citizens from the 1840s and the 1850s are feeling this sense of mission, that we must have hemispheric control. Land greed and ideals were thus conveniently co-joined. Some even considered that we should spread as far as into South America. Well, this plays very well into the campaign of 1844. Polk was of middle height, 5'8". He was lean. He had white hair, which he tended to wear long. He had gray eyes, had a stern face. He took life seriously, and he drove himself mercilessly into a premature grave. His burdens were increased by an unwillingness to delegate authority. Methodical and hard-working, but not brilliant. He was shrewd, narrow, conscientious, and persistent. What he went for, he fetched, wrote a contemporary. Purposeful in the highest degree, he developed a positive 4-point program and with remarkable success achieved it completely in less than 4 years. Many a president, when they are campaigning, will promise, if elected, I will do this, that, and the other. And once they get into office, they find out they have no ability to control this, that, and the other. This is one of the few times you have a candidate that says, if elected, I will do these 4 things, and actually does those 4 things. First of all, he says, I will lower the tariff. We've been fighting over the tariff for years now. He devised a tariff for revenue bill, which reduced the average tariff rate of the tariff of 1842. Tariff had gone back up from 32% down to 25%. We do have to have a tariff. The government needs the money to run on. This is before the day of the income tax and all these type of things. And so the main source of money for the government was the tariff. We did need a tariff. But, he said, we only need enough for revenue. We do not need a protective tariff for northern industry. Secondly, he said, I'm going to restore the independent treasury. And this was achieved in 1846. What I did not cover with you is one of the things that caused such havoc with the country under Van Buren's administration that threw us into depression was that Jackson had killed the Bank of the United States, which had been created under Hamilton's tenure as Secretary of the Treasury. Well, he does not agree to have another Bank of the United States, but he says we must have an independent treasury, and this he does create. His third and fourth on his must-do list as president were the acquisition of California and the settlement of the Oregon dispute. Yes, I am an expansionist president, and John Tyler had already taken care of the Texas issue before Polk even gets into office. But he said, if elected, I will solve the Oregon dispute, and I want to acquire California. Well, taking the whole Oregon territory had been promised in the campaign of 1844. There had been the big slogan, 54-40 or fight. And the 54-40 came from 54 degrees 40 minutes north latitude. Let's see, latitude, longitude. Is that longitude? Longitude, this way's longitude. Latitudes this way. Whichever way it is. Once again, if we had owned Alaska at this time. This is currently the panhandle of Alaska. It would have all connected, but at that time, Russia owned Alaska. He had campaigned under the promise, if I get elected, we will acquire the whole shebang. Now, campaigning 54-40 or fight is a nice slogan. But Polk wanted no fight. He again proposed to the British, hey, why don't we just continue along the 49th parallel? The British minister in Washington, on his own initiative, said no. Fortunately, though, for peace, the minister began to experience a change of heart. A couple years later, early in 1846, the British, hat in hand, came around and themselves proposed the 49th parallel. Hey guys, we have a wonderful idea. What would you think of if we just take the 49th parallel and continue it out to the coast? Well, dadgummit, where have we heard of that idea before? But now that it is suddenly their idea, well, I think, you know what? I think we can agree with that. Now, the island of Vancouver is not split. It goes completely to the British in Canada, but we will split the mainland across the 49th parallel. So that big issue of we must have access to the Columbia River, that is our St. Lawrence to the west. The St. Lawrence is on the eastern coast and the Columbia River is on the western coast. They gave up on that. And so obviously we have no control over the northern part of the Columbia River, but once it crosses the 49th parallel, we control the Columbia River. So we don't fight. No, we don't gain the northern part of the Oregon Territory, but we peaceably worked it out. So after Lewis and Clark have made their venture here, we jointly occupy the Oregon Territory for 10 years. That is the agreement. At the end of the 10 years, we tack another 10 years. We'll jointly occupy it for another 10 years, a total of 20 years, before we finally do work it out and simply continue the 49th parallel. The Senate speedily accepted the offer and approved the subsequent treaty, despite a few die-hard shouts of 54-40 forever and every foot or not an inch. The fact that the United States was then a month deep in the Mexican-American War doubtless influenced the final vote. And we will get to that in a minute. But yes, you do not want to have war to the north of you and war to the south of you. And we were already at war to the south of us with Mexico. And his second to-do, or his last to-do item was to acquire California. Originally, we had, with Spain, when we acquired Florida, we had said, we will not look, we will not touch. Well, then Santa Anna, the Mexican government had said to Stephen F. Austin, bring 300 families in. Well, then you had the Texas Revolution, then you had Texas independence, and then Texas asking for admission, and we finally bringing them in under President Tyler. Now, the California area, yes, we've got Oregon now, but California is on President Polk's to-have list. He and other manifest destiny believers had long coveted its land, and especially the spacious Bay of San Francisco. This splendid harbor was widely regarded as America's future gateway to the Pacific Ocean. San Francisco Harbor. Oh, this was the biggest thing in California we wanted. And that is because it's Golden Gate. Why is the bridge that spans the Golden Gate called the Golden Gate Bridge? Because it spans the Golden Gate. This area has been known as the Golden Gate for years before the bridge was built. You have big storms out here on the ocean, and you have only about a mile, a little bit over a mile's distance here between these 2 points of land. And then you have this huge, spacious inland harbor. Now we call this Oakland Bay, even though it's connected, and this is San Francisco Bay, but it's one massive bay, and here's Alcatraz. It's called the Golden Gate because this over a mile distance is extremely deep. Usually with a narrow entrance like this, it would slowly fill up with sand and silt and build up, and it would eventually completely block up and become filled in. What you have is very strong granite, steep, tall rock formations here that go deep into the ocean, and you do not have silt and debris that fill in here. This channel is extremely deep, and you have very swift ocean currents that come in and come out, that with the tides and everything, that keep this area ever from filling in. And like I said, there's no gentle flowing down. No, you have sharp, steep cliffs coming off of this granite. And so beautiful, beautiful harbor area to come into. Now, if you have your ship here and a storm coming in, you're just going to get smashed to pieces. But if you can, I mean, how much wave and weather can make it through a little over a mile distance stretch there? Now, these bodies of water inland are big enough that you can get yourself some pretty good wave action even in here. But nowhere on the West Coast do you have a protected harbor like this. And so we are coveting big time this San Francisco harbor. This was our gateway to the Pacific Ocean. We had already, for years before this, on the East Coast, we were sailing all the way around South America, stopping ever so often, for supplies, fresh water, whatnot. And your last stop off place was usually here, San Francisco. Then you would head off, hit the Hawaiian Islands here. You can just barely see the Hawaiian Islands there. And then the big place to go to was China. That's where the trade was that we wanted. Then you headed back, you hit the Hawaiian Islands, back up to San Francisco, stopped wherever you wanted, for water supplies on the way, and then back to the East Coast. Well, we didn't own San Francisco. That was Spanish territory. They could refuse to let you stop if they wanted. If we could own the Golden Gate, what value that would be for us. Mexico owns California, but we want that. The population of California in 1845 was very sparse. It was basically deserted land. Yes, there were some people living there, but it was not densely populated. It consisted of about some 7,000 Spanish Mexicans. plus about 10 times as many native Indians. There were fewer than 1,000 foreigners in California. And of those foreigners, guess what? Most of them just so happen to be U.S. citizens. Now, in the American mind, Native Americans, Indians as we called them, had very little value to us. We have just been through a few years before the Jackson administration. He had spent his whole life killing or moving out the Indians. So we are not regarding them at all. You don't exist, you don't matter. So we're dealing with only about 7,000 Spanish Mexicans and less than 1,000 foreigners, of which most of them are U.S. citizens. So we've already got a good portion of the population being former U.S. citizens, or maybe they still are U.S. citizens doing business out here. Polk was eager to buy California from Mexico, but relations with Mexico City were dangerously embittered. A more serious bone of contention was Texas. The Mexican government, back when Texas had declared independence, had told the U.S., don't look, don't think, do not admit Texas into the Union. This is a state of Mexico in revolt. You're going to bring her back into the fold. We will consider it an act of war against us if you annex Texas. And Mexico had made in 1849 and 1840 two half-hearted raids into Texas. Now the United States had annexed Texas, and Mexico had recalled its minister from Washington, D.C. When you recognize a nation recognizes you, you send and receive ambassadors. Now, Mexico pulls its ambassador out of Washington, D.C. We told you don't do this. We will consider this an act of war. And she retrieves her ambassador. Diplomatic relations were completely severed. Deadlock with Mexico over Texas was further tightened by a question of boundaries. During the long era of Spanish-Mexican occupation, the southwestern boundary of Texas had always been the Nueces River. The Texans were now claiming the more southerly Rio Grande instead. The state of Tejas, under Mexican rule, had always had the Nueces as the southern boundary. But at San Jacinto, when Santa Anna was forced to sign two treaties, one was for the independence of Tejas, Texas. The second was that no. We do not want the southern boundary to be the Nueces, but the southern boundary will be the Rio Grande. Of course, as soon as he was released, he said those agreements were signed under duress and neither one apply. Now, Polk, because Texas has been annexed, feels that he must side with the state of Texas that has just come into the Union. And he says, I will uphold you with the understanding that the Rio Grande is now the southern boundary of Texas, not the Nueces. In a last desperate throw of the dice, Polk dispatches John Slidell to Mexico City as minister in 1845. He says, I still gotta acquire California. I gotta see if I can't make this work. The new envoy was instructed to offer a maximum of $25 million for California and any territory Mexico might be willing to throw in that's to the east of California. But the proud Mexicans would not even permit Slidell to present his insulting proposition. So they never even heard about the 25 million. They never heard about anything. You get out of here. We're not even going to listen to you. And American blood on American soil. A frustrated Polk was now prepared to force a showdown. On January 13th of 1846, he ordered 4,000 men under General Zachary Taylor to march himself down from the Nueces River to the Rio Grande, provocatively near the Mexican forces. So here we have General Taylor. He was known for his very unmilitary-like dress, and he was known for wearing hats, not in the military fashion, but more like Mexican sombreros when he rode around in front of his men. Previous to this time, Polk had Zachary Taylor and his men stay on this side of the Nueces. Yes, I am upholding Texas's claim to owning and being possessor of the Rio Grande as its border, but let's not annoy Mexico while I'm trying to buy California. Well, when they won't even listen to us, Polk says, all right, Zachary Taylor, you get yourselves down here and you line your men right up on the border, provocatively near the Mexican forces who were on the other side of the border. He was expecting a clash, but 1 month passes, the next month passes, the next month passes, the next month passes. From January all the way to May, nothing happens. Finally, Polk informs his cabinet on May 9th of 1846, I've had enough. I've waited. Nothing has transpired. I am going to propose to Congress that we ask for a state of war. According to the rules of the Constitution, the President asks Congress for war. He is Commander-in-Chief of the military. He asks Congress for war. Congress then votes and says, yes, you may have war, or no, you may not have war. If Congress says no, despite being Commander-in-Chief of the military, you do not get war. So once again, checks and balances. Two departments have to agree to war before the nation can go to war. And the two reasons he was going to ask Congress for war was based on unpaid claims. Remember those two half-hearted attempts of Mexico to invade? They had attacked twice in 39 and 40 Texas. They'd gone up, raided, caused damage, and then run back across the border. Well, the Texans had put in claims to the Mexican government for the damage that had been caused and cost them to their livestock, their farms, their buildings. And Mexico had not paid for the damage caused in these two raids. And so the United States, upholding Texas citizens, we are telling Mexico, you must pay for the damage you caused in those raids. And the second reason we would go to war was based on Slidell's rejection. How dare you insult us by rejecting our ambassador? But that very evening, as fate would have it, news of bloodshed arrived. This is before the telegram, anything like that. News had to have come on horseback all the way from the battlefront to Washington, D.C., so it happened a couple days earlier, but it just arrives that evening on May 9th. But Almost 2 weeks earlier, on April 25th, 1846, Mexican troops had crossed the Rio Grande and had attacked General Taylor's command with a loss of 16 Americans killed or wounded. So, bloodshed had finally occurred, and we had been attacked. It's always good when you're not the aggressor. When you have been attacked, it makes a big difference in the morality of the whole war. You do not want to be the bad guy. You want to be the one that's been attacked. Oh, this makes a difference. Now, Polk sent a vigorous war message to Congress the next day. He declares that despite all our efforts to avoid a clash, hostilities had been forced upon the country by the shedding of American blood on American soil. Congress overwhelmingly voted for war. Oh, give me a break. Despite all our efforts to avoid a clash, he was going to go the next day and ask for war. His bacon just got saved because 2 weeks earlier the Mexicans had attacked us. Ay, ay, ay. Incidentally, not enough. A gangling Whig congressman from Illinois, one Abraham Lincoln. Remember back then, the Whig Party, newly created Whig Party? Well, Abraham Lincoln was a Whig congressman. This was his first time in Congress. He was one of those newbies. Whig congressman. He introduced certain resolutions that requested information as to the precise spot on American soil where American blood had been shed. This man said, I want to know that I am morally going into war on the right side. I want to know that we didn't cross the river and attack them, or that we didn't cross the river and they attacked us and we were on their side. I want to know that they crossed the river and attacked us on our side. We must have right on our side. He pushed his quote-unquote spot resolution. I need to know the exact spot. He pushed his spot resolution with such persistence that he became known as Spotty Lincoln, who could die of spotted fever. So, this newbie in Congress, his first claim to fame, who will become future President of the United States. Claim to fame, he is Spotty Lincoln, who could die of spotted fever. Well, the big question is, did Polk provoke war? Well, both sides, in fact, were spoiling for a fight. Hot-headed Americans, especially Southwestern expansionists, were eager to teach the Mexicans a lesson. The Mexicans, in turn, were burning to chastise the bullies of the North. Possessing a considerable standing army, heavily overstaffed with generals, they boasted of invading the U.S., freeing the black slaves, and lassoing whole regiments of Americans. They had some of the most elite trained horsemen in the world. And they had too many generals. They were currently at a time of peace, and if you have 1 or 2 stars on your uniform and you want to gain 3 or 4 stars, you want to rise in rank, the best way to do so is in time of war. That's the quickest way to rise in rank. In time of peace, it is very slow. And so being overstaffed with generals, they were eager for a conflict because very quickly we can rise in rank. And they did not have much faith in the American military. They were very organized in Mexico. Man, they had some of the best trained horsemen fighters and with the sword and that whole shebang. What were we? We were a bunch of hodgepodge. We had militia from this state and that state. We all wore different color uniforms from each militia that we were from. We didn't have any of this fancy horsemen with swords and stuff like the Mexicans did. And our last military conflict that we could show to the world was disaster. The War of 1812. What did we accomplish? Nothing. We spent 2 years fighting and we gained no land. We lost no land, but we gained no land. Yes, our last victory had been a good one against the British. Andrew Jackson at the Battle of New Orleans. But we hadn't shown the world anything. And so, man, the Mexicans really felt they were going to show us Americans how a well-trained military did it. They were burning to chastise the bullies of the North. They were hoping also that the quarrel with Britain over the Oregon Territory, remember, we were still using all those expressions, 54-40 or fight, not a, what was that other slogan? I forget it. And they figured if we went to war with England to the north, we could not concentrate fully on Mexico in the south. And look at what you were dealing with in the south. All of northern Mexico was nothing but arid desert. California, all the way out west of California, all the way down here. Not until you start getting into way southern Mexico, above Mexico City, do you get into area that is heavily populated. Nobody lives in the desert. And so they figured this vast arid desert, how are you going to conquer us with all of this desert arid expanses? It just seems too fantastic when you're going to be fighting England up here. Both sides were fired by moral indignation. The Mexicans could fight with the flaming sword of righteousness, for had not the insolent Yankee picked a fight by polluting their soil. Many earnest Americans, on the other hand, sincerely believed that Mexico was the aggressor. The dethroned Mexican dictator, Santa Anna, then exiled with his teenage bride in Cuba. Oh, Santa Anna, Santa Anna. The United States has so been blessed by Santa Anna's rule in Mexico. He will come in and out of power in Mexico 6 different times. He'll be in power and get bored and leave for a while. Then he doesn't like who he left in power, so then he'll come back and take power again. At one stage, he married a 13-year-old, and the Mexican people got rather annoyed at him. This is one of those stages. And they chucked him out of the country and chucked him into Cuba and said, you cannot come back to the Mexican nation. So he is exiled into Cuba. And he contacts the United States and lets it be known that if the American blockade squadron would allow him to slip back into Mexico, he would sell out his country, But the double-crossing Santa Anna did not, after we let him back into Mexico, sell out his country. Instead, he rallied the Mexicans to a desperate defense of their soil. American operations in the Southwest and in California were completely successful. In 1846, General Stephen W. Kearny led a detachment of about 1,700 troops over the famous Santa Fe Trail from Fort Leavenworth to Santa Fe. Where's my picture? Where's my map? Hang on. Where's my map? My map has disappeared. There we go. Kearny goes across the desert all the way to California. In California, when the war breaks out, Captain John C. Fremont, the dashing explorer, just happened to be there with several dozen well-armed men. Well, he had been forewarned. Get yourself a couple dozen well-armed men and be ready. They hoisted the banner of the short-lived California Bear Flag Republic. And once again, this, like Texas, is one of those states that briefly was its own nation before becoming a state. Now, Texas much longer. The Lone Star State was 9 years, whereas California will only be a couple months before they will come into the United States. General Zachary Taylor, meanwhile, had been spearheading the main thrust into northern Mexico. He was known as Old Rough and Ready because of his iron constitution and his incredibly unsoldierly appearance. Now, if you're going to get yourself painted for a picture, yes, you're going to get yourself in full regalia and you're going to look your best. But on a day-to-day basis, he was known for not caring how he looked while out on the battlefield or out drilling his troops, etc. Turning the pages. He sometimes even wore, as I mentioned earlier, a Mexican straw hat. He now fights his way across the Rio Grande down into Mexico. He has several victories and crosses the Rio Grande. The first one will be here at Monterrey, September 1846. So the fighting begins in April, and next big battle, Monterrey, in September. Some artist conceptions of Monterrey. Many of the generals that we will see in the Civil War cut their teeth in the Mexican-American War, and many of them will be very good friends, and it will just break their hearts when at the time of the Civil War, some of them will be on opposite sides on the battles, and many of them were very good friends, and they will be devastated when they will hear that their good friend has fallen on the other side of the battlefield. But here, you can see him, his body here on the side of his horse and his leg just hanging onto the saddle over here. General Grant was always known as an excellent horseman, unbelievable horseman. Here, he volunteered to ride back and get ammunition outside the city during the Battle of Monterey. And to keep from, of course, getting shot, he is guarding his body on the side of his horse. And the capitulation, the surrender of the Mexican army at the Battle of Monterey to General Taylor. So we have the Battle of Monterey. Then the next big battle is going to be down from Monterey down to Buena Vista. And you go from September to February of the next year. Next big engagement here at Buena Vista. Wait. Yeah, Buena Vista's got to be here. Buena Vista. Here, Santa Anna will engage with the U.S. Army. He has been let back in, and Santa Anna brought his men up back when the Texans were fighting for independence. He always thought himself to be quite the general and did not like to take advice from any of the other generals. He really knew how things should be done. And here at Buena Vista, he also will not take advice. General Winfield Scott, old fuss and feathers, he has been sitting there ready. He has been waiting for Santa Anna. And let's go back to our map. He has gotten the lay of the land. He's been there for a while. You always want the highland. And he's dug in. He is waiting. Santa Anna, meanwhile, has 20,000 men. Zachary Taylor up here, I'm sorry, I said Winfield Scott, didn't I? I am so sorry. Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor up here sitting waiting has 5,000 men. So you've got 4-to-1 odds, 20,000 to 5,000. He instead does a 3-day forced march to get his 20,000 men up here to do battle. Do they stop at night to rest? No. Do they stop to cook food? No. This is forced 3-day march. Those that couldn't keep up just fell at the side of the road. You know, after you sleep, if you can pick yourself up and make it, get on to the battlefield. He arrives at the battlefield 5 o'clock, evening time, and General Zachary Taylor has been sitting there for months with his men. It is evening time. They're dug in, and does Santa Anna tell his men, "We are finally here. Everyone, get a good night's sleep. We will attack in the morning." Oh, no. That is not what he does. No. Instead, he says at 5 o'clock in the evening, "Charge!" They fight all night long. They fight all the next day. And at the end of the next day, guess who has won the battle? He who has 5,000 men, or he who has 20,000 men? You got it. He who has 5,000 men wins. Why? Because they're the only ones who were able to keep their eyeballs open. Because these men are too exhausted to do what they're supposed to do. Stupidity, stupidity, stupidity. Had Santa Anna have listened to his men, or his generals, had he have simply said, get a good night's sleep. We attack in the morning. Anything else other than charge. I mean, 4-to-1 odds, surely the day would have ended up different. The battle would have ended up different. And let's get some pictures here. Once again, this is the Chihuahuan Desert, arid territory. And of course, we're going to have General Zachary Taylor having the high ground, which always makes it better for you in the battle. Before we get to Scott, it is a total rout. There are stories being told now. The newspapers, can you imagine the newspapers in the United States? 4-to-1 odds, or should I say 1-to-4 odds. And Zachary Taylor has won. Man, he is the biggest hero of the day. Suddenly, I am president. I am James K. Polk. Am I being written about in the newspaper? Am I the glorious one? I am president of this nation who is at war. No, I am not being written about in the newspaper. Suddenly, the most important and popular man is Zachary Taylor. Is this going to be allowed to continue? Absolutely not. And how is this going to be explained in the Mexican newspapers? 4-to-1 odds and we lost? You have so got to be kidding me. Suddenly, stories are spreading in the newspapers. They're cannibals. They were eating us. They're the size of giants. We were like grasshoppers. They were just stomping us. I mean, how else can you explain 4-to-1 odds and we lost? Unfortunately, from this point on, General Zachary Taylor's victories in the Mexican-American War would end. Polk realizes, I cannot let this man get any more popular than he already is. This one battle here has made him so heroic that I must end his success. Can't take away from his success, it's already happened. But I cannot continue to let him win any more battles. And so all future victories will now be under the control of General Winfield Scott, not under Zachary Taylor. Well, how will that transition take place? And the rest of this Mexican-American War is going to take place by ship and then going inland because, once again, Buena Vista is as far as Zachary Taylor can go. And yet, to win the war, you got to come down here and take the capital of Mexico City. You got to sack Mexico City. So what? You captured some desert. Nanny, nanny, nah. We don't care. You got to come down and sack the capital. That's why we were so lucky when, in the War of 1812, England sacked our capital. We at least didn't let them get our president, but I mean, they burned our White House, they burned our Capitol. At least they didn't take Fort McHenry a few miles up. They didn't get our naval fort. But now we are going to have to come down and come inland and sack the capital. But, all the excitement of that we will cover in our next lecture.